3 common mistakes that we make when trying to manage emotional eating. Possibly the top 3 mistakes. So the first one is that we're thinking that emotional eating is always a bad thing. Now, most of us actually find ourselves emotionally eating at some point. I would say pretty much all of us do it at some point in our life. And it could be for celebrations, it could be that we are going out to celebrate birthdays, we could be eating a piece of cake, for example, for a birthday. We might not be that hungry, but we might eat the cake and enjoy that as part of a happy celebration. So that is part of emotional eating. Perhaps Christmas celebration, perhaps doing really lovely meal out for a special occasion. And that is all part of emotional eating. It's a part of that connection and that social aspect of emotional eating. And sometimes we might emotionally eat when we feel a bit sad or lonely or unhappy about something, and we use it as a comfort to soothe ourselves. And it doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem if from time to time we do that and we use food to soothe ourselves. But the problem is that the narrative that we can often create around that to ourselves is that we feel very bad about it. Often we can feel when we emotionally eat, it's a very bad thing. We can beat ourselves up and feel guilty about it. And really, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a bad thing. It's more around if it's something that we do from time to time, or is it something that becomes that crutch, that's something that we always turn to. So the second common mistake that we make when emotionally eating is the all or nothing thinking that I've blown it, right? So the all or nothing thinking is really that sort of black and white thinking that everything is either good or bad, right or wrong. If you think about the food, I've eaten bad food, you might think. I've eaten the bad food, so I must be a bad person. Okay, we use language like I shouldn't, I should have done this, or I shouldn't be doing that. I must be doing this, or I mustn't have had that. That's very common language that we're using to ourselves around that all or nothing thinking. Getting stuck into that cycle there. So when we're in that all or nothing thinking, we can very often think, well, I've had the bad food, I feel bad about it, I'm a bad person and I've blown it. So I've blown it all, so I might as well carry on. And that's very commonly when we get stuck in that cycle. Also, that's when it becomes a coping mechanism that is our only coping mechanism. And that's when it can be problematic. When it becomes the absolute automatic thing that we turn to, and that can create anxiety, obsession, overwhelm, the shame and the guilt in that cycle that's just keeping you stuck. That's when it can become a problem. But actually, what we want to do is think about our relationship with food as a lifelong journey. And it is a lifelong journey, but don't get me wrong, it gets easier when you do the work on it. It does get easier, rather than it's all or nothing. We've blown it one day, we've been good the next day. It's a journey, it's a learning. And part of it is learning self-compassion, part of it is learning body acceptance, and part of it is learning emotional regulation. And when you've got the tools and the strategies to learn these things, it can make such a difference and really help you on this journey, and really help you to realise that actually it's not that you've blown something one day and the next day then you'll have to start all over again. It's that you're still where you are on your journey. So that kind of takes me on to my third common mistake around emotional eating, and that is turning to dieting to solve the problem. What I want to really ask you, it's very common for people that I work with that they feel like they've blown it, and the next thing they do, the very next day, it's turning to a diet, going on another diet, or skipping a meal, restriction. I've eaten this many X calories now, I've blown it, so I need to skip my next meal. Right? And what I want to ask you is this really the solution to your emotional eating? Or is it the solution to the contempt that you feel towards your own body? So I'm going to ask you that again. Is it the solution to emotional eating or the contempt that you feel towards your own body? Because it's very common that we get stuck in this body image struggles, and that emotional eating can stem from that, but it can also lead to then into dieting and restriction. That's when, obviously, unfortunately, when you get stuck in the dieting cycle, that's when it can lead to that obsessional thinking, the hunger, the cravings. So actually, it's not the solution. Dieting is not the solution to emotional eating. It is actually the fuel to the fire. Yeah, it really is. And sometimes it's hard to sort of believe that, because the most common mistake is to just think I need to restrict, and it is actually the opposite of what we want to be doing. Instead, we want to become our own detective. We want to remove the judgment. We want to be curious as to what might have led to that episode, if it felt uncomfortable, if there was shame and guilt following it. Obviously, if we had an emotional eating episode, or we can move on from it, it's not a problem. But it's if we are struggling consistently in this cycle, then we need to find out what's going on and what it could have been. So it could have been that we were feeling lonely, sad, unhappy, anxious, angry. We could have had an argument with somebody that could have led to that. It could have been general overwhelm and stress in your life. It could be that you were due on your period. It could be that you were exhausted. It could be that you'd had a really bad night's sleep the night before. It could be so many different things. And this is why we want to bring the compassion into it, because we want to understand what is it that we really were needing at this time. We want to understand it. We want to understand ourselves. So just beating ourselves up and blaming ourselves and feeling guilty isn't going to get us anywhere. It's just going to keep us stuck. So we want to really try and understand, what was it that I was really needing? And actually, what might be more helpful to me if that happens again next time? So it's really having that understanding, and that really is the key, the awareness, the understanding, without the judgment, to help you move forward. So just to recap, the 3 common mistakes are thinking emotional eating is always a bad thing. It is not necessarily. It becomes problematic when it becomes our only coping mechanism. The second mistake is all or nothing thinking that you've blown it. We want to move away from that all or nothing thinking and seeing this as a journey that we are going on. And the third mistake is turning to dieting or restriction to solve the problem. We definitely don't want to turn to that. We want to try and understand instead what we might have needed at that time. Take care, everybody, and have a great week.